And following that, Gary has a few comments he wants to make, and so we'll let him have a shot.
Sue made the mask. As soon as the COVID hit, what did you make, 300, 400 masks for hospitals? See, I need Marcia here. I don't even have my jacket on. Justin's, I hadn't seen Justin's thing. My sister sent it to me last night. And I had a frantic call at 6:30 this morning saying, don't open that video. Don't look at it before you get to the mortuary. And I said, well, I haven't had time, so I didn't. So, but here we are. I'd like to talk a little bit about who Marcia was. All of you knew her for different reasons, at different times of her life. I put a Facebook post out, you may remember, may have seen it, I should say. And when we were looking at these photos that were showing earlier, we identified what was happening by Marcia's hairdo, because it was changing. We couldn't do it by her clothes because she would wear it maybe once or twice, and the closet is full right now. And she did it all. When she got a new dress, she got a new bra, she got new panties, she got new shoes, she got a new purse, she got new jewelry, she got it all. You know, and she looked good. Barbara Soretta back there is the most elegant lady in our neighborhood, but Marcia was one of the best dressed. I used to go to Barbara a couple times, I asked her, where do you get your clothes? Make Marcia look like you. And really, she looked like herself, and that was what was important. So just let me tell you a few things about Marcia. First, how we met. I met Marcia in 1971. I had just gotten out of the Army. I had done a tour in Vietnam, and I was back in my hometown of Hastings, Nebraska, to go to college, finish college. And Marcia was in Hastings. She was in her first year of teaching. She'd gone to school in Colorado, and she had returned to Nebraska to be close to her parents and to acknowledge their sacrifice by sending her to college for 4 years. She didn't have to work, everything was paid for. So she wanted to honor them, and so she came back and got a job at Hastings, which was 25 miles from her hometown, Grand Island. She and her roommate that she met at the school she was teaching at decided to get an apartment together. And I was living with 3 other guys. That was back in the day when if you didn't have the money, you just got more roommates. And so some of you may remember those times. Anyway, she and Jody, her roommate, had a party. They had a housewarming party. And everybody knew everybody. I knew some of the people, and Marcia knew even fewer than I did. Long story short, we were the leftovers. We always referred to ourselves as the leftovers. And we spent time talking that night. I asked her out the following weekend. It's been almost 50 years, and there was never a break in the whole time. We went together for a while. We got engaged. We got married in 1973. So, in a sense, here comes a bad joke, John Freeman. In a sense, the leftovers became the main menu for the next 50 years. I worked hard on that one. A couple of stories about Marcia. When we were dating, one night, and don't take this wrong, but I took her to her apartment, and we were sitting in the car. We were talking, truthfully, we were talking. And I don't know what I said, but all of a sudden she bailed. She got out of the car, and she went into her apartment. And being the stubborn type, I decided I need to deal with this right now. So I went up to knock on the door. I knocked on the door swung open. She'd gone in her apartment, left it open for me to come on in. So I knew I was done for her. You know, I knew this was it. You know, I knew what her intentions were at that point. I was just telling some of her friends, there's three ladies in a row there. Marcia's best friend, Barb, surprised me this morning. Walked in the front door a little while ago, and I'm so pleased you're here. And I was telling them, One time, whenever we go to San Diego, which was 2 or 3 times a year minimum, we would always go to Point Loma. And one time driving through the cemetery there, we pulled over and to watch the submarine. There's a submarine coming in. And we pulled over. What you get there? We pulled over to watch the sub come into the sub pen. And Marcia's looking around and she said, "Boy, isn't it nice here? Thank you." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Would you like to be buried here?" I said, "Oh, it wouldn't be bad." And then she said, "Are you eligible?" I said, "Well, I'm a veteran, and I think so, unless it's strictly a Navy cemetery, but I don't know." And so we kind of left it at that. And a few years later, sorry, my mouth is great. A few years later, we were back and they had expanded the columbariums for the cremains. And she said, "You know, we decided we want to be cremated. Would you like to be here then in the wall?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine. That sounds great." And so she said, "Okay, then that's fine." And then she said, "But I want to be on the harbor side." And I said, "Why the harbor side? Why not the ocean side?" She said, "Well, I want to be able to watch the ships come and go." That's Marcia. Those of you who knew her knew that she was serious about that, right, Barb?
Yes.
Yeah. Another story. Years ago, Marcia bought a car and she financed it at what was then Desert Schools Credit Union. Over time, she paid the car off. And then when we went to Europe last fall, and before we went, she said, "I think we should go to Desert Financial and get you on the account." And I said, "What account?" She said, "Well, the account I have there." And I said, "What account is that?" And she said, "Well, for that car I bought." And I said, "Well, why do we have an account?" And she said, "Well, I didn't know the Bank of America was still transferring the money to Desert Schools for the car payment, so it's just there." I said, "Well, how much money is there?" She said, $20,000. And I went, "Oh, well, that's cool. Yeah, I'll go sign right now. Let's do this." Marty mentioned the scholarship. That money's going to be used as seed money for the scholarship. I asked her one time when we were younger, I said, "What do you expect of me? What do you want me? What do you want me to provide you?" And her quote was, "Gold, diamonds, and fast cars." We did the job on the fast cars, and she has the speeding tickets, as many of you may know. We take turns. Which one of us has to go to traffic school every year? We did take turns. Marcia was very athletic. You may not know that. She was a good golfer, and she was a good skier. That's why I don't golf and I don't ski, because I didn't like her beating me all the time. She was so much smaller than I am. The one time we were getting off the ski lift, and I just kind of squashed her when I pushed off. And she was almost ready to go back down, but she jumped off at the last second. A few years ago, she decided she wanted to learn how to catch a baseball and how to catch a football. So we went out in our yard, got the football, got the baseball. She did pretty good with baseball. She was real good with the gloves. She once I taught her to put it in front of her face, you know, some of the line drives. But she did well on that one. Football wasn't quite so good. And after the first day, she just said, "I hate this." I said, "Why?" And she held up her hand, she'd broken 2 nails. And her nails were important to her. Her nails were always perfect. And so I said, "Well, I'm sorry, and I guess this is over." She said, "No, let's go to the sporting goods store. I want receiver's gloves." So that's how she solved that problem. Okay. Marcia had her doctor, as Marty noted. Her hood is out there in the lobby. I was kind of panicking. I couldn't find where it was. It was buried amongst all of her clothes, but she had a lot of clothes. And so, but I found it last night, and I was glad I was able to bring it. Where's Mary Radcliffe? She's here someplace. There she is over there. You were in her cohort, weren't you?
Yes, I would.
Marcia and Mary and a bunch of other professional educators had a cohort at ASU that they went through all their classes together and stuff. They spent a lot of Saturdays at our house studying. They had a little study group. And when I thought it was time for them to go, I'd go out and get my leaf blower and I'd walk back and forth in front of the window where they were sitting by. I need something to eat. No, but anyway, Marcia blew through that. She did it in 3.5 years, start to finish. She did her dissertation. She researched it. She wrote it. She defended it, and she had her doctorate in about 3.5 years, which was amazing. A side note to that is that she worked full time during that period. And I don't mean to be crass, but she went through menopause at that period too. So we had some exciting nights at our house. But anyway, Marcia's doctor called me the morning after she died and told me that he had put on the death certificate that she died of a heart attack. She was compromised in a lot of ways. People may not know her whole health history. But the basic thing was she had something called factor V Leydens hypercoagulation disorder, which meant that her blood clotted too much, so she had to be on blood thinners. And that affected her health for the rest of her life. Marty mentioned she had 5 pregnancies. We had 5 pregnancies. There's 2 miscarriages and 3 stillbirths. This disorder caused that. But we didn't know it because that was in the late 70s and the early 80s, and the disorder wasn't defined until the early 90s. Marcia was diagnosed in 2001. She'd gone to the hospital because our dog at that time, Ozzy, was old and sick, was laying on the floor in front of our front door, and she tried to open the door, and he didn't like it, and he turned and snapped her in the hand, and he nipped her. And she thought getting blood poisoning, so she called her doctor, and the doctor said, go to the hospital, is anything else wrong? And she said, well, my knee hurts, or my leg hurts, and it's hot behind my knee. And the doctor said, that sounds like a blood clot, get in. Well, she had a blood clot, or clots, I should say, from her hip to her ankle. Again, caused by factor V Leydens. Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. How embarrassing is this? And spam. It's a spam call, of course. Okay. So we didn't know what was happening with the babies, and we finally found out in 2001. They put her on blood thinners, and she was there for the rest of her life. But in the course of that, she lost her gallbladder. She had her thyroid ablated, and she was on medication for that. She had major hemorrhage in 2008. She lost the functioning of her adrenal glands and had to take medication for that. And I'm missing something, but I'm gonna leave it out. Anyway, she had a complicated medical history. And so I always called her a chemistry problem. And she had to stay in balance all the time. And lately she's been out of balance. And I personally think that contributed to her passing. But I miss her a lot, and I'm sorry, so sorry that she's gone. But I'm so glad that she went the way she went and didn't suffer and wasn't in a lot of pain. Like I said about her health, it had a major impact on her health, but it didn't define her life. She moved on. Some of you may have come into Marcia's life during her, what I call her accident-prone years. And she had a bunch of them. There was a series, let's see. Most of it, what people don't know, Marcia had a lot of fractures, but what they don't know is the medication she took was sucking the calcium out of her body, so she had to take supplements, and it was always a problem trying to keep her balanced, trying to keep enough calcium going in to compensate for the calcium that she was losing. Let's see, I'm glad Barb is here from Lincoln. The first one, I went back to Nebraska for a high school reunion. Marcia decided to stay in Lincoln with Barbie. And I was gonna pick her up on Sunday, we were gonna catch our flight home. I got back to Barb's house, Marcia was laying on the sofa in the family room. There was a series of chairs, dining room chairs, strategically placed between where Marcia was laying and Barb's bathroom. And I found out that the night before, Barbie and Marcia, and I don't know who else was with you, went out for dinner. And Marcia decided to get an extra round of drink. She slipped in the bar, fell down, and fractured her kneecap. So they say she wasn't drinking at the time, that she wasn't drunk. I don't know. And then Barb and I, there's a little anecdote that I wasn't going to tell, but I just thought of it. Barb and I and Barb's sister Diane and Marcia went to get something to eat before we left, and Marcia was having trouble walking. So I carried her like a sack of potatoes. I had her over my shoulder with her head in the back. Carried her in, put her in the chair. And we're in this restaurant. Nobody paid any attention to us. I mean, it was really weird. So then when we're going out, I put the big, heavy door, big door. And I pushed the door open, I was walking out, and Barbara, her sister, when one of the two said something to me, and I swung like this, and I heard this thump. And everybody's doing what you're doing. Barb and her sister were dying. They have a wicked sense of humor. And they were dying to laugh, but they knew they had to be nice, and make sure that Marcia was okay. And Marcia just going like, what did you do that for? So anyhow, I didn't mean to tell that, but that's too good, not too. The second fracture that I remember, she fractured her left tibia, and if you can believe this, she slipped on ice at the Glendale Elementary administration building. This is Arizona, this is Phoenix. Marcia found the only piece of ice in the town to slip on and fracture her leg. Okay. Let's see. Oh, she fractured her right tibia. This is a good one. She fractured her right tibia because she got caught in the covers while she was trying to dust the headboard on her bed, on a waterbed. And she got caught in the covers and twisted and fractured her right leg. She was the master. I graduated. It's kind of like that. I retired New Year's Eve on 2011. And Marcia had actually retired the year before, but they had this program, I can't remember what it's called, where you can go back to work for a while as a teacher or anything in school districts and combine retirement and salary. But anyway, she was still working. But it was in March. I don't know what holiday it was, but she decided to go out for a bicycle ride. She rode her bike all the time. She had to ride her bike because she had her left knee replaced by this time. She went for a bike ride, and she was just down the street from our house, and she hit a pile of debris on the side of the road, just some stickers and things like that. And she fell off her bike. As near as we can figure, she used her front brake instead of her rear brake. So she went over, and she was clipped in. She had clip shoes on. She wasn't supposed to wear clip shoes. The doctor specifically said, do not wear your clip shoes on your bike pedals anymore. You have to have your feet free because of your appliance or your what you call it, in your knee. So of course she wore clip shoes. On that one, she fractured her left wrist. She had a plate and 9 screws. She fractured her hip, her pelvis, her scrotum. She had a concussion. She had cactus things sticking out of her cheeks when I saw her. And then they took her to the hospital in an ambulance. They took her to Mayo because of the concussion. She broke her helmet when she hit, as a matter of fact. And so they observed her at Mayo, and they were gonna cut her bike shorts off. And she said, no, these are expensive bike shorts. I don't care how much it hurts. Don't ruin my bike shorts. So they didn't. The nurse came in and got very, very protective of Marcia and told her, don't you touch those shorts. If you need to take those off her, you can come and get me and I'll help. Don't you use any scissors. Okay. And then the last one was one night we were having dinner. We'd been in Denver to a great nephew's graduation. We got home and we sat down and had some pasta. And Marcia, it was before we remodeled our kitchen. We had a peninsula that came out across from where our kitchen table is. And she stood up too fast, and you get lightheaded. It's called syncope. I found this out from the doctors. Anyway, she started wobbling. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I just got to get my balance." And before I could turn in my chair to get up to help her, she just did a face plant. She passed out and just went flat. Fractured her jaw, broke 10 teeth, cut her chin, another 9 stitches. So after she got out of the hospital from that, and she went and had to have surgery on her wrist and get the plate and the screws in, she had to go see the dentist, and she had to have all new crowns. He said, well, you broke this, you broke that. And she said, I just need to know one thing. And he said, what's that? She said, do I still have my wisdom teeth? He said, yeah, you didn't break any of your wisdom teeth. She said, okay, fine, just fix the others. She was very proud of the fact that her mouth was big enough to hold her wisdom teeth for her whole life. Okay. When we retired, and after we turned 50, and if anybody in here is younger than 50, I highly recommend starting to travel young and often. But after we turned 50, we traveled a lot, domestically and in Europe particularly. One story that sticks out was last fall, in September 15th, October 15th, we went to Europe. We're in Vienna, and we each had a big suitcase and a little suitcase, and then a carry-on, or a backpack, I should say. But I was rolling the two big suitcases, and she had the two little ones. And I couldn't find an elevator, so I got her on an escalator. And as luck would have it, one of the suitcases decided it wanted to be on a step lower than the one I had it on. And I lost control of it, and I hollered out, and to the people down below me, there was about 12 steps. And of course, they speak German, and I couldn't remember the word for help or look out. But anyway, my suitcase rolled down. This man heard me, he turned, he caught my suitcase, and then he came up a couple steps to give it to me. I reached for it, and I went ass over tea kettle. I just went boom. And I tried to get up. I couldn't get my arm above the little rail on the side, the little handrail thing. I had my elbow up under it, and it was getting sliced open. There was a little thing there. I didn't know it. And so I'm riding down the escalator. I finally decided I might as well make the best out of a bad situation, so I just laid down flat. And I just figured the escalator would take me off one step at a time. Well, I'm a little bit heavier than what the escalator load was, I guess, because it just parked me on one space and the stairs just kept going under. I turned and I looked at Marcia and Kurt, her cousin here, and I were talking about this earlier. There's a look that some of the Bachmans have, and I got the look. It was the teacher look. It was the what in the world are you doing look. It was, you look like you might be hurt. Maybe I should be serious about this. But mostly it was trying to stifle a laugh. They stopped the escalator. All these people had to stop. They had to come and lift me up and get my suitcases and all that stuff. And then the medics came and said, "You okay?" And I said, "I'm fine. I don't need anything." And so we walked away, and as we're walking, Marcia said, "You're bleeding." And I said, "Where?" And she said, "Your left elbow." And I looked, and I had a cut from here to here. I had puncture wounds here. I had a bunch of other cuts here. I'm bleeding all over the place. So I'm walking like this, and I finally said to Marcia, "We need to stop. We need to get the first aid kit out of the bag." And she looked. It wasn't in the bag. She didn't know where it was. And so I said, "I need something." And she said, "Well, just stay there. I'll get you something." So she went into the nearby candy store, got me some candy wrappers, and came out and put it on my cut. In Marcia land, that was just a perfectly logical solution. but I'm going, okay, that's fine, but I can't walk around like this and pull a suitcase. I really need a Band-Aid, And she said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "There's a drugstore, let's go over there." So I'm standing in the entryway to the drugstore, bleeding all over the place. So I finally bought a couple of umbrellas just to, make the people feel better about having me standing bleeding under place. I could see Marcia back in the back. She's just looking and looking and looking. Well, she came back with little Band-Aids. So I had about 12 Band-Aids on me. And all I wanted was a gauze patch with some adhesive tape. She said, "Well, it'll work. Don't worry, it'll work. I bought a whole bunch of them, so when they get filled, we'll fix them." So that was our travels. I'm almost done here. She had a fitness routine that was unparalleled. People in our neighborhood all knew about Marcia in the mornings. She'd get up, take the dog for a walk. It just so happens that the circuit around her neighborhood is a mile. And so she'd go walk that mile to warm up with Ozzy and then Bebo and now Dooley. And then she would come back. She had one of those big rubber balls, those fitness balls. She'd sit on that ball. Jim and I discovered this one day when we were working on our bathroom, and we went out to get something, and Jim was just astonished. And I was too. I hadn't seen that she anyway. She'd sit on the ball, put her feet up on the frame of the garage door, and she'd do 400 or 500 crunches, balanced on that ball every morning without fail. Then she'd get on her recumbent bike and ride that for a half hour. Sometimes she's got a big weight machine out there. Anybody want a weight machine? I got one. She's got a big one out there that she would lift weights and stuff in the mornings. It just, that was Marcia, that was her fitness routine. But a lot of people, I don't know how many of you read the tribute to Marcia by Lori Klasky, our next door neighbor. And she made a comment about Marcia in her workouts every morning. So to wrap up, I just want to tell you all how pleased I am to see you here, how proud I am and was of Marcia her whole life, how much I miss her, how much family and friends and co-workers and everybody else meant to her. And she was sincere. She was a great listener, and she was sincere. She had neighbors that were friends. She had work people that were friends. She had dog walkers that were friends. The morning after Marcia died, I was out about 7 o'clock, I think. And a lady, I had been walking Dooley when we were heading back into the house, the lady said, "Good morning." And I said, "Good morning." And she said, "I just want you to know that anytime you want me to walk Dooley, I'll be glad to do it, and I offer my condolences." I finally found out that she was a neighbor lady. I just didn't know her. She's got a big red, she's the hound dog, what do they call them? The sniffer dogs, you know? But anyway, but that's the kind of person Marcia was. She had those relationships with people I didn't even know. Somebody told her name was Julie. Did that ring a bell with any of the neighbors?
Yeah. Julie Lockett.
Huh?
Julie Lockett.
Julie Lockett, okay. So, and finally, this would have been the 30th consecutive year that we did our annual holiday party. I can't cook like Marcia. I can't do the things Marcia. For those of you who came and didn't know, all the food that was there, Marcia made. And she usually made it the day before, sometimes the day of the party. We entertained upwards of 75 people the first Saturday of every year. And I really regret I just can't do it because I don't know how. So somebody else can take up the mantle in the neighborhood. I thank you for your time and your attention. And Lynn, did you want to say something?
Oh, not right now.
Sue?
I think Sue.
Okay, well, there's Sue there.
Although she wasn't gonna think I could do it, but that's.
Sue is our dear friend. She's the one who did the obituary. She's the one who made our masks. She and her husband Jim here are the ones that allowed Marcia and I to help them remodel our house. Sue told me the other day when we cleaned up the guest room, I guess. And I said, "I think I need to repaint it." And she said, "Oh, good. I've been 11 years ago, I noticed that paint. It's been on my mind ever since." So whenever Sue and Jim run out of project at their house, she comes over and just subtly mentions, "You know, it would look a lot better if you did this, you did that." That's why our bathrooms have been redone, our kitchen's been redone, our cabinet has been redone. And they're just great friends, great people. Sue Collins.
Well, when Gary suggested I say something, I told him I just happened to have somebody up here blubbering, so I'm in. But I wrote this over and over and over, and I did it in big type, so I put my reading glasses on, and these are on because I have a COVID hairdo, meaning it's not been cut in months. I can't see what I'm doing. So, I'm not positive when I first met Marcia. I met Gary 17 years ago, when I got transferred to Phoenix for work. He was on my staff. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anything about living in the desert. And you know Gary, he talks to everyone, picks their brains, gets the scoop, gives an opinion. So I began to rely on him for a lot of information. In particular, living in Arizona, snakes, scorpions, swimming pools, you name it. On occasion, we'd even talk about work. He also let me know pretty early on that he didn't want to like me. He eventually decided I wasn't so bad after all. And then he and Marcia invited Jim and I to their annual Christmas party. Maybe that was the first time I met Marcia. I mean, I met her, but I didn't really talk to her because I'm not comfortable in big crowds like that, and I was probably obsessed with when to leave. But she was also very busy. As he said, they had 75 people there. I didn't really talk to her. Or maybe the first time I really met her was one day at work. I was in my office, Gary was in his. I don't know what he and Marcia were talking about on the phone that compelled him to put me on the phone, but he did. And she and I began to talk. I'm not sure exactly what the whole conversation entailed, but I do remember asking Marcia if Gary really did pee in the swimming pool as much as he proclaimed. She assured me he did. And we kept talking and comparing notes. I liked her a lot, so a friendship was born. We had some things in common. We liked to cook, we liked to travel. We both loved spending money on stuff we didn't need but wanted. We used to hit the Philosophy makeup counter down at Nordstrom, and they'd have these special events and buy enough junk to last us a lifetime. And that said, the mall, when we were done, she'd always start drifting to the shoe department, and I'd have to save her from herself. Then we'd go on down to Yankee Candle, the shop that sells candles. And then we go to Illuminations and buy some more candles. She loved candles. The woman had them in her kitchen, bathrooms, living room, dining room, master bathroom, outside, inside, you name it. She loved them. I eventually introduced her to the flameless candle. That brought the likelihood of burning a house down to a minimum after a real close call in her master bathroom during one of their parties. And her nephew, who we just listened to, replaced all the batteries last weekend in all of her candles, and they're again lighting, and that's a good thing. But I'm sure if Justin ever sees another candle needing a battery, it'll be too soon, the poor guy. And Marcia loved to grow things. Plants, flowers, roses, vegetables, you name it. There's always some sort of green thing making its way out of a pot or the ground. She would dutifully water and tend to these things. If I didn't know she was in education, I would have guessed she owned a department store. Did anybody mention yet that she loved clothes and shoes and handbags and sunglasses and jewelry? Always dressed up in matching, and in everything matching. We go to dinner, breakfast, lunch, she always had a snazzy little outfit on. But as snazzy as she dressed, as nice as her hair looked, as pretty as the glow of her candles was, it had nothing to do with who Marcia really was. And why so many people loved her. She was genuine, quiet, thoughtful, but not afraid to stand up for what she believed in. She was a deep thinker that spent her energy on what was important to her. She was highly educated and devoted her life to just that, teaching, advising, advocating, caring. She was an activist. She fought for kids who didn't have a great start in life. She advanced her degrees because she felt she just had to do more for those who were physically and emotionally challenged. She felt she needed to learn more, become more skilled in communicating with the deaf, become a better administrator, so she pursued her master's degree. Then, Dr. Smith she became, a PhD. She eventually retired after dedicating decades to her passion, and then she went right back to work for another year. before she finally called it quits. She enjoyed retirement, but she was never done. I guess that while she was planting tomatoes, she was obsessed with what she could continue contributing. As she cooked Gary dinner, she was probably thinking about what she did and didn't want to pursue. But she'd light up when she'd encounter a conversation having to do with education and kids with disabilities. She was an expert, their activist. But I bet you never imagined she'd take a sledgehammer to her own kitchen. She did. She tore down walls, right down to the studs. Then she helped rebuild. She helped build cabinetry. She painted the walls. And she loved that kitchen. She was proud of that kitchen and used that kitchen to cook and bake for the people she loved. It was her happy place. Just like her career, she blew down barriers, rebuilt what wasn't working so her kids could learn, thrive, and grow in a better environment. I'm sure they loved her. I don't know anyone who didn't love Marcia. But she and her health didn't always get along. Her body wasn't always good to her. It tried to rob her of her knees. She replaced them. It tried to clot her blood. She took thinners. It took her adrenal system away. She took pills. It robbed her of her thyroid. She took another pill. She'd get stitches. She'd heal. She'd always win. She'd fight and win. But this time she didn't win. Instead, she lay down to take a nap because she was tired. She chose not to fight. And as Marcia would usually do, she left quietly and peacefully. We'll never know exactly what she had to leave us to go do, but I bet it's probably a fight she's going to win. To say we knew her was a privilege, to say we miss her is an understatement. And Marcia, all I could obsess about today was what the hell to wear. That's all I could come up with.
This is classic me. I always forget something, and Marcia always told me it was okay.
You're Liz Cornell. You're next.
Marcia would think this was really embarrassing, and she would love it. She rocked life. She lived it to the fullest. I came into her life as one of her later friends. We met about 20 years ago. For me, she was the little lady that looked like she played tennis and had that giant dog. And everyone in our family called her the dog lady, the lady with the giant dog. People would say to me, will she let us pet it? I'd say, she lets me pet it. So over the years, I ended up getting to know her as a friend. And we bonded over our understanding of each other's health issues and our limitations. I have MS. I make commitments and then I have to cancel them. People invite me to things and I'm so excited and then I have to cancel. She got it. And she and Gary would drive up to my house and say, come on, go to lunch. And I'd say, no. Didn't you guys notice I'm in my pajamas? And my hair is in this weird bun with a pencil in it? And they'd say, go change. I think we were going to lunch for 45 minutes or an hour. We'd come home 4 or 5 hours later. And everywhere we went, the staff loved her. The managers would come over. They would tell her about their children. Oh, of course, they were telling Gary too. They would talk about their latest trip, the trip they were planning, where they were being transferred to, And then when they came back, the first table they'd run to, after their transfer, and then they were back, was Gary and Marcia's. Gary and Marcia had their own specific tables. So I was tickled pink to become part of this little world. We talked about everything. We talked about current events, history, what we were going to do when we got really old. Gary was sure he was jumping ship first. And so I'd say, well, I'm going to take care of Marcia. I know she has a lot of people who love her. We're all going to pitch in. But I'll keep track of your passwords. She hated technology. Hated technology. I'll keep track of your passwords, and I'm going to take good care of you. And she would look at me with that look. I guess it's the Bachman look. And she'd say, yes, you will. You better take good care of me. She thought she was going to possibly get a little house in France with Gary. We talked about it. That's kind of where I imagine she is right now. She's hanging out in France. And if it's not real France, it's, an even better France. She was proficient. She was the secretary of the French club. I went through her yearbooks, and you could tell she was nerdy and smart and interesting, and she stayed that way throughout her whole life. When I would want to take someone eccentric to listen to someone like Bill Nye or John Kelly, Marcia was the one I wanted to come with me. And she was game. And we could talk about controversial topics, and we could disagree or agree. And she was so tactful, she would just go, And then she'd say, well, that's wrong. That situation is wrong. What can we do about it? I've learned a lot from her. I've learned a lot from Marcia. I just wanted to tell you briefly a little about, for those of you who aren't related, where she came from. Like, where did this creature come from? How did this woman exist? She comes from tough stock. There's a book written about her family. It's called Brands on the Boswell. And I've thought a lot about how persistent and pragmatic and brave she was. She bore great sorrow, but she never made anyone suffer for that sorrow. She celebrated their children. She had their children over to cook in her home. Melanie, who's here, remembers learning how to make upside down pineapple. Marcia taught her to make cookies and would send Melanie home with a few and with one of her precious roses. And there were many other children in the neighborhood that Marcia did this for. And these children have grown up, and she has celebrated the births of their grandchildren. She wished she had grandchildren. We talked about it, but she didn't resent it. She shared other people's joy. And so this little paragraph really struck home with me when I read it. The Boswell is the ranch that the Bachmans lived on. It's on the border of Wyoming and Colorado. Teddy Roosevelt went there. He went there on horseback. This was one of the places he wanted to see. I never heard Marcia brag that the president went to her ranch, but there's a lot of stuff she didn't brag about. Few events on the Boswell, the Bachman's ranch, had an adverse effect on the Bachman family. To be sure, there were times of frustration, anxiety, and even a minor accident or two. But the Bachmans were a hardy family, And they took these such things in stride. She has the genes. I would like to recommend the book to people. I also wanted to tell you, speaking about how tough she was and her family, she was born into a blizzard, and they were the greatest, even though she was born in 47, you know, she was born right at the end. 48? Okay, I thought it was December 47, December 48, okay. I need to fix it. Actually, it was like 58, but judging by how good she looked. But these were historic blizzards, 100-year blizzards. This stop that Marcia came from, they just went to the town a month early because there were too many babies born out there in the snow. The day after she was born, her dad got in the truck, drove as far as he could. When he couldn't drive any further, he went to a nearby ranch, rode the rest away through the blizzard to take care of his stock. He did this 4 times while baby Marcia was in the hospital. The ranch was snowed in for 4 months. 2 of those months it was 20 below zero. There wasn't electricity, they had a generator. They had a wood-burning stove. A neighbor skied in to bring oranges for the Bachman baby. That was Marcia. And this tenacity and bravery and desire for adventure was in her blood. And I think the examples that she set for us every day, we can pass on to those around us. I know I already have. My kids knew Marcia. I talked about her all the time. Even my mom knew who Marcia was. Marcia was the woman who could get me to go back in the house and put some shoes on, which I never wanted to do. But Marcia could convince me that it was right. So I just want to say I'm honored to have been one of her buddies. She talked about all the other ones that weren't in Phoenix. She talked about Barb. She talked about Sue. Lena was one of her new ones, her new adopted daughter. And I'm just so grateful that she was generous with her heart. Never made us fight over her, because we might have. And I know that we'll all take good care of Gary, even if it's just for Marcia. Because that's what he used to say. He'd say, you know, they're here for Marcia. And I say, Gary, take what you can get. Thank you.
Being married to a Bachman myself, a lot of this rings true. I think Doug Collins was going to make some comments.
McDonald.
Oh,
Collins. Chief
my mistake.
Good morning. I was one of Gary's employees, one of Sue's employees, and I came late into Marcia's life. Gary became my boss in about 2004, 2005, and we would travel together all over the country. Part of our job was selling property for the U.S. government. And we had a lot of time together during the day and even more time together at dinner and at night. And usually when we were done beating the local today's work issue to death, we would start talking about our family and our lives at dinner and in the evening. And I soon realized that Gary cared so much about Marcia. They say people pay attention to the things they love. A guy works on his race car, a woman collects dolls. Gary inevitably tied Marcia into every one of his stories, whether it was an anecdote, something that we both found absurd about one of our employees, whether it was a statement he was making about a new policy Sue was going to have to implement on behalf of our program. Inevitably, the story came back to something to do with Marcia. And I knew then that Gary was very much in love with Marcia. And there was a distance between Gary and I because I was a subordinate, he was my employer, and every year he would invite Marty and I to his annual Christmas party. And besides being sick of traveling all over the U.S. and a couple international trips to Guam, I felt uneasy about, the relationship. And then Gary retired in the end of 2012, and I think that was the first year that Marty and I came over here to Phoenix. I didn't feel that uncomfortable. And a lot of the stereotypes I had about Gary and never having met Marcia, well, I did meet her at a couple sales, but Gary always came off to me as this straight-laced country club Republican. And how soon I learned how much Gary and I had in common, and even more, what a sweet lady that Marcia was. And then we had a co-worker that got sick, and another ex-employee, Fidel, and his wife, Becky, and Marcia and Gary, and my wife, Marty, was still working, so she couldn't attend. But the five of us drove from Phoenix to Austin, straight through to visit a co-worker who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And in that 18-hour trip, I got to know Marcia so much better. We would shuffle the seats in the car at every stop. Of course, it was a wrestle to get the keys away from Gary. In fact, on the way back from Austin in that trip, which was this time of the year, July, end of June, early July, Gary drove straight from Austin, Texas to Phoenix without stopping. And I begged him, Gary, you tired? You want me to drive? No. And I'd look at Marcia and she'd go shake her head, no, leave him alone, he's good there. And Marcia knew Gary better than anybody, and I soon learned that, and I soon learned why he cared so much about her. Gary and I, as you might have presumed, liked to speak a lot, and Marcia was an extremely careful listener because she would pick her spots to correct him, she would choose when not to correct him, and she would jump in when he reached that spots in his story that he needed a little help, and which weren't often. But I learned so much about her and Gary's relationship by listening to Gary's stories and watching Marcia. And it became an annual treat for my wife Marty and I to come over and enjoy their annual Christmas party. And I had no idea what a big deal it was until I started playing dice with some of you out there that are neighbors at the party, and how competitive Marcia was at that game. But I'm going to leave you with this thought. Marcia was a great listener. Marcia was a giver. She wasn't a taker. And I say that as a taker. Gary and I unabashedly think of ourselves first. Marcia and Marty are perfect soulmates for us because they cared about us, they cared about others before they cared about themselves. And that's how I'll remember Marcia Smith. Thank you.
Is Tony Gross here?
I don't think so.
Yeah. If there are anyone else who have some comments they'd like to make, Alan, come on up and while he's coming up here, I'll mention that I didn't know about the Buckland look as well. Having my wife and her father. Not often, but once in a while.
Hello, my name is Fidel Atencio, and Gary and I used to work together, and I was deeply honored when Gary asked me to speak today, but I have to admit, I don't do funerals very well, so bear with me. I mentioned to my wife what Gary had asked of me, and she tried to help. As some of you husbands out there might understand, she didn't like any of the ideas I came up with. We agreed to disagree, and then later in the day, she came back to me and she said, she could hear Marcia saying, "Fidel, you just say what you want to say." And I knew she was right. One time, Gary was given the unpleasant task of supervising me. You could say he was my manager, but how do you manage the unmanageable? The best he could do was try to keep me in check. It was after we both retired that Gary, our wives and I would get together. My wife and I had the pleasure of spending time with Gary and Marcia. I had spent a lot of time with Gary on the job. As Doug mentioned, we would spend a lot of time on the road and swap a lot of stories and get to know each other very well. But I didn't get to know Marcia until the four of us got together for lunches. We would have 4-hour lunches, talking away. Initially, mostly Gary and I talking. Okay, Gary talking. I would notice Marcia sitting there quietly and politely smiling. She didn't say much, but I knew she was listening. There's a saying that says, talk much and they think you're a fool. Be silent and they become curious. Well, I became curious. So in time, all four of us would look forward to our 4-hour lunches, talking away. Marcia spent her life as an educator. She was a teacher until the last day I saw her last month. She was teaching without ever realizing it. The better I got to know her, I figured out she was not antisocial. She was anti-bullshit. Just because she doesn't react doesn't mean that she didn't notice. She noticed everything, just didn't speak on it. Don't underestimate Marcia. She knew more than she said, thought more than she spoke, and noticed more than you realized. Confidence is silent. Insecurities are loud. The smarter you get, the less you speak. So what did Marcia teach me about myself? I talk a lot, but I'm not very articulate. I listen, but I don't hear. I observe, but I don't see. I'm an intense reader, but I can't write. Marcia is so much what I'm not, but I'm going to try and learn from her. But then again, I'm unmanageable. I'm going to miss our lunches.
Thank you, Vidal. Is there anyone else who would like to make a statement? You can't hear me? I'll speak louder. Is there anyone else who wants to make a statement or comment? I have one for closing. It's from Cousin Barbara. She says, I'm one of Marcia's cousins. Several of us, as young children, grew up on the same street in the small town of Oshkosh, Nebraska. I remember this friendly little town where, even as a 5-year-old, we could ride our bikes to our cousins' homes to play. Marcia was just 1 year older than me, a year younger than my older brother, Craig. Marcia and I were pretty clever, we thought, at trying to get Craig in trouble, even though sometimes it backfired. When we wrote on the walls of a basement home next door, which was being remodeled, and then attributed it to Craig, our prank was quickly sorted out, and we were duly punished. We both continued to exhibit a bit of mischief throughout our lives. Our lives became more distant after my family moved to Idaho, even though we made annual trips to visit the cousins. The active life of the outdoors became my family's obsession. Then college, marriage, careers, and growing families kept interfering with connecting. We reconnected at the big Bachman family reunion at Estes Park, Colorado, back in the late 80s, and again, either in Phoenix, Boise, Stanley, Idaho, or in between. Marcia and Gary were really great hosts when I brought Mom down for a visit about 10 years ago, and also when my oldest grandson Zimmer and I had an adventure down there, as well as a few other trips on family travels to the Southwest. They came up to Idaho for birthdays, my retirement, memorials, the solar eclipse, and to particularly visit my mom and Connie. Marcia's smile and enthusiasm were always such a joy to share. When I reflect on her contributions to the family, I compare her to our dad's sister, Aunt Esther. Esther was such a positive, supportive, inclusive, loving force. Like Esther, Marcia has inspired me to continue to connect to the Bachman family despite the distances and chaotic and busy times. Our family heritage continues to feed the core principles and strengths of each individual. I see these traits in Marcia through and through. I'm so thankful she took a leading role in keeping the connections strong. May we all work to keep her spirit alive. And with that, please consider joining Gary for a reception right after this at their home at 5143 Palo Brea in Cave Creek. As we leave, stay safe and stay well.
On behalf of Hands and Mortuary, and Gary, thank you for coming to show your love and support. And that concludes the service. And be safe going home. Remember, social distancing.